The fifth and last way that I found that New Agers can try to justify this all religions are one theory is something that I see as something of a last-ditch effort. And this is the claim that maybe the level on which all religions are true is simply too high for humans to comprehend. I came across one New Age author who compared the problem of reconciling conflicting religious doctrines to the problem of adding fractions, such as 1/4 plus 1/3. Now, these fractions may seem incompatible on first glance, but if we expand the denominators, if we express 1/4 as 3/12 and 1/3 as 4/12, well, then the two are harmonized, and then adding just becomes a simple matter of 3/12 plus 4/12 equals 7/12. And this New Age author concluded that this can be seen as an analogy to our fractioned world, that the terms Allah and Brahman, Jehovah, the Great Spirit, the Tao, these are all forms of infinity with different denominators, and that our finite minds are simply unable to grasp this higher common denominator. Now, could it possibly be true that some infinitely higher common denominator could account for the ways that religions will, at least in some respects, utterly contradict each other? For instance, there's my earlier example of the extreme religious differences between the beliefs of the Jainists, whose scriptures held that all life is so precious, even gnats and mosquitoes are not to be harmed, and the beliefs of the ancient Aztecs, who believed that a bloodthirsty higher being demanded continual human sacrifice. So, do the religious beliefs of these two groups have some higher common denominator that's simply beyond the human mind? Now, on the one hand, I guess I cannot rule out that possibility. The very finiteness of my own mind would account for my failure to recognize the deity's higher common denominator. But there's also the much more plausible reply, which is that in the struggle to justify this New Age feel-good oneness ideal, with the harsh reality of conflicting religious doctrines, we're too finite to comprehend the infinite. It's just a theoretical rationalization. And the same answer is almost identical to what we can hear from apologists from fundamentalist religions. A Christian apologist, for example, could use the same "we're too finite to comprehend the infinite" rationalization to explain all sorts of biblical difficulties. For example, why an all-fair God would be so infuriated by Eve's single act of disobedience in the Garden of Eden that he would make billions of women suffer through the pains of childbirth, often die in childbirth too. Why God supposedly commanded the slaughter of enemy toddlers in the books of Deuteronomy and Isaiah and Samuel, etc. Or take the logical difficulties of the whole Jesus on the cross thing. The issue that if Jesus is God, well, then why would God need to torture himself to appease his own anger against the circumstances that he himself omnisciently set up? With all these issues and dozens more, the Christian apologists could just sweep it all under the rug with the same answer. Well, we cannot comprehend the infinite, so we just have to accept it. The problem, of course, with this "we cannot comprehend the divine" answer is that it justifies every religious practice in the world. The answer "just accept it, even if you can't understand it," leads to the question, well, just accept what? Just accept the notion that religions is utterly contradictory from each other, as Islam and Shintoism really are at one with each other? Or what about the New Testament's John chapter 14, verse 16? John chapter 14, verse 6, in which Jesus supposedly says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me." Now, should we just accept the common interpretation of this? That means that the billions of people throughout history who never heard of Jesus will just burn in hell for eternity. Or should we just accept what Hinduism tells us about the divine directions for the caste system? If we're going to accept the argument that we're too finite to comprehend the infinite, or too finite to comprehend what people tell us about the supernatural world, then what argument do we have against the ancient Aztecs, who believed that the gods wanted us to tear the hearts out of young virgins? So, because this "we cannot comprehend the divine" argument, it's a catch-all answer that can justify everything, it really justifies nothing. So I'm just going to briefly recap each of these 5 New Age solutions and why I find each of them unpersuasive. First, there was the different religions for different needs theory. And an unavoidable consequence of this theory is that it means God set up religions in such a way that they would be in perpetual conflict with one another. meaning that God either has a sadistic side or at least a split personality. So this theory compromises God's very sanity. Second was the corrupted message theory, and third was the paradox theory. And both of these contain the contradictory aspect that they say God is powerful and brilliant enough to do mind-bogglingly complex things, but totally blows it when it comes to relatively simple matters like paperwork, like maintaining quality control over his written word, or quality planning over the results of what will happen when one religion utterly contradicts another religion. Fourth theory was the emanator theory, which says that God cares enough about us to offer salvation, but apparently doesn't care enough to give specific directions other than to let these emanations let loose in ways that lead us to inspire religions that contain some positive aspects, but also that inspire us to persecution and bloodshed. And then there's this catch-all solution of the finite mind cannot comprehend the infinite. Again, this is a rationalization so broad that it can justify every religious doctrine ever created. So it really justifies nothing. Now, most New Agers that I know and that I've had email conversations with don't get too deeply into the field of New Age apologetics. It's been my experience that this is not a well-developed field. For example, I found it much easier to research answers from Christian apologists than New Age apologists. Most New Agers that I've come across don't try to defend their beliefs through the arguments I've discussed here, because most don't even take it that far. It's been my experience, anyway, that New Agers usually limit their observations to the factors that religions have in common, like those I mentioned in video 3 of this series. The stress on honesty, kindness, treating others as we ourselves would like to be treated. And from there, they just jump right to the conclusion that religions contain no meaningful differences between them. And from that point, they feel free to pick and choose different aspects of different religions that they find appealing. The aesthetic niceties of Shinto shrines, maybe Buddhist meditation techniques, Islamic poetry, some selective philosophy from Christianity and maybe from Taoism, some selective rituals of nature worship from Native Americans, and then they'll just refer to themselves as spiritual, not religious, and just leave it at that. And again, as I mentioned in video 2, for the most part, I find this philosophy relatively harmless, and its tendency to lean toward tolerance probably is bringing some peace to the world, or at least it's much less likely to lead to warfare than fundamentalism. So I think an argument could be made that I shouldn't have bothered to include a criticism of this philosophy in my dialogue with the Christian Proselytizer book, and I should not have bothered to make this video series, because despite its logical flaws, this philosophy has enough beneficial side effects that maybe it should qualify for having some sort of protective status. That being said, still, I feel there are people out there who are in a similar position to where I used to be. As I mentioned earlier in this series, I used to listen to New Agers speak with a completely straight face about how the world's variety of religions all come from the same ray of sacred sunlight before being broken into their respective colors. And I had the feeling that something wasn't quite right about that. But because I hadn't yet studied religion at all, I didn't know exactly what questions to raise. And as I got a little bit older and started to raise questions, I would sometimes get answers that were something along the lines of the 5 theories that I've discussed here in this video series. And again, because I had yet to really study religion or really apply much thinking at all to the subject, I just had a difficult time pinpointing and articulating exactly why this New Age philosophy has such a slippery elusiveness to it that it's ultimately meaningless. So for those of you in a similar position who try as much as you can to fully understand your own beliefs and find that your minds are the clearest when they're not clouded with internal contradictions, for this audience I included this section in my book and I'm sharing it with you here on video. I know it's been a long series and I hope you feel it's been worth your time watching. And thanks for watching.